The morning sky was still dark when I arrived at my daughter Rebecca's suburban home. I'd been traveling all night on a cramped bus, my bones aching from the journey, but my heart was light. After 5 years of barely speaking, I was finally going to see my only child and my 3 grandchildren. The weight of the certified check for $4. $2 million in my purse felt like nothing compared to the heaviness of our estrangement, but I wasn't going to tell her about my sudden fortune just yet. I wanted to know if she'd welcome me back, as her mother, not as a jackpot winner. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I should have read the signs from the moment Rebecca opened the door. Her smile didn't reach her eyes as she gave me a stiff hug. "Mom, we weren't expecting you until afternoon," she said, checking her watch with irritation. "James is still asleep, and I need to get the kids ready for school." "I'm sorry, sweetheart." "The bus arrived earlier than scheduled," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady despite the chill of her welcome. Rebecca sighed, her perfectly manicured hand pushing back her blonde hair so unlike my own graying curls. "Well, come in, I guess. But we're in the middle of renovations in the guest room, so you'll have to stay in the garage. We've fixed it up a bit." My heart sank, but I nodded and followed her through their immaculate home, all gleaming marble countertops and designer furniture, to a side door that led to the attached garage. A folding cot had been set up next to their luxury SUV, with a thin blanket and a small space heater nearby. "It gets a bit cold at night, but the heater helps," Rebecca said, already turning to leave. "Bathrooms through that door. I've got to wake the kids. We'll catch up later." As I sat down on the creaking cot, I realized my daughter hadn't even asked how I was doing after 5 years of separation. She hadn't mentioned my recent retirement, my health, or the reason for my visit. The garage door closed behind her with a decisive click. What Rebecca didn't know was that 3 weeks ago, I had won the multi-state lottery. After 30 years of playing the same 6 numbers, my late husband's birthday and our anniversary date, they had finally hit. After taxes, I was left with $4, $2 million. It wasn't a fortune by today's standards, but it was enough to change. Everything for a retired school secretary who had lived paycheck to paycheck her entire life. My first thought hadn't been about buying a beachfront condo or traveling the world. It had been about Rebecca and my grandchildren, about finally having the means to be part of their lives again. But as I unpacked my small suitcase in that cold garage, placing my toiletries on a workbench between power tools, I wondered if money would be enough to repair what was broken between us. My name is Eleanor Jenkins, though most people call me Ellie. I spent 32 years teaching America's youth as a public school secretary in Millfield, a small town where everyone knows your business and gossip travels faster than internet signals. I raised Rebecca on my own after my husband Daniel died of a heart attack when she was just 7. It wasn't easy. A secretary's salary doesn't stretch far, especially with a growing child. But we managed. I worked extra hours, took on weekend jobs cleaning houses, and somehow kept us afloat. Rebecca was always bright, ambitious, and beautiful. When she earned a scholarship to an elite university on the East Coast, I was ecstatic even though it meant she'd be moving far away. I saw it as her ticket to a better life than I could provide. What I didn't anticipate was how quickly she would transform. Each time she came home for holidays, she seemed more polished, more sophisticated, and increasingly embarrassed by our modest life. She met James Harrington during her junior year. He came from old money, with family connections, that opened doors I couldn't even see. Their wedding was held at his parents' estate in Connecticut, an affair so lavish that I felt out of place despite being mother of the bride. James's mother, Vivian, made it clear she found me lacking, from my discount store dress to my unrefined accent. Rebecca has done well for herself considering her beginnings, she'd said during the rehearsal dinner, glass of champagne dangling from her manicured fingers. After the wedding, the distance between Rebecca and me grew. Calls became less frequent, visits rarer. When she had her first child, Sophia, I wasn't invited to help. "Mom, we have a night nurse and a doula," she'd explained over the phone. "You'd just be in the way." That hurt, but I tried to understand. Her world was different from mine. Then came the twins, Oliver and Emma, and I only learned about their birth through a formal announcement card 2 weeks after they were born. Our relationship deteriorated further when Rebecca and James moved to Oak Ridge Hills, an exclusive gated community in Westport. During my first and only previous visit 5 years ago, Rebecca had introduced me to her neighbors as her childhood nanny rather than her mother. When I confronted her about it later, tears stinging my eyes, she'd exploded. "You don't fit in here, Mom. My friends' parents are ambassadors, CEOs, and art collectors. What am I supposed to tell them? That my mother cleans houses on weekends and clips coupons? James is up for partner at his firm. We can't afford to seem common." I left the next morning, my heart shattered into pieces so small I wasn't sure I'd ever gather them all back together. For 5 years, our only contact had been through brief phone calls on holidays and the occasional FaceTime session with my grandchildren, who barely recognized me. Until 3 weeks ago, when 6 numbers changed everything. After the initial saldo shock of winning, I didn't rush to claim my prize. Instead, I spent days researching financial advisors, tax implications, and how to manage sudden wealth. I wanted to be smart about this. Eventually, I hired Martin Godfrey, a respected financial advisor recommended by my credit union. With his help, I claimed my winnings anonymously. Thank goodness my state allows that. Set up trusts for my grandchildren, invested wisely, and allocated funds for my modest retirement needs. "What about the rest?" Martin had asked, pushing his glasses up his nose as he reviewed my allocations. "I want to help my daughter and her family," I'd replied. Martin had given me a careful look. "In my experience, Ms. Jenkins, money can complicate family relationships. Have you considered how you'll approach this?" I hadn't. Not really. In my dreams, I'd simply shown up at Rebecca's door, announced my good fortune, and watched as years of estrangement melted away in tears of joy and reconciliation. But Martin's question gave me pause. "Perhaps," he'd suggested, "you might want to visit first, without mentioning the money. See where things stand naturally." And so here I was, shivering in my daughter's garage on a folding cot, with millions in the bank, but apparently not enough worth to merit a proper bed in her home. The first full day of my visit was a study in controlled chaos. Rebecca was constantly in motion, dropping the children at their private school, attending a charity committee meeting, overseeing the kitchen renovation, and preparing for a dinner party that weekend. "It's for James's work colleagues," she explained as she frantically typed on her laptop at the kitchen island. "The senior partners and their wives. Everything has to be perfect." I offered to help, but my suggestions were quickly dismissed. "Mom, the caterer has it under control. And no offense, but your idea of dinner party food is casseroles and Jell-O salads." I bit my tongue. It was true I'd never hosted anything fancier than a potluck, but her dismissiveness stung. The garage grew colder as evening approached. The small space heater barely cut through the chill, and I found myself sleeping in layers of clothing. My back protested against the thin cot mattress, but I didn't complain. I was determined to make this visit work, to find some way back to my daughter's heart. On the second day, I finally had some time with my grandchildren after school. Sophia, now 10, was polite but distant, clearly taking cues from her mother. The 7-year-old twins were more receptive, especially Emma, who crawled into my lap as I read her a story. "Why don't you visit more, Grandma?" she asked, her innocent question piercing my heart. "Well, sweetheart, I live far away, And I've been very busy with work, I answered, not wanting to place blame or burden her with adult complexities. Mom says you don't like planes, Oliver added, building a Lego structure on the floor. I blinked, in surprise. That's not true, I just couldn't afford— Kids! Homework time, Rebecca interrupted, entering the room with a tense smile. Mom, can you give us some space? Their tutor is coming in 20 minutes. As I retreated to the garage, I wondered what other falsehoods Rebecca had told her children to explain my absence from their lives. That evening, I overheard Rebecca and James talking in the kitchen while I was getting a glass of water. I hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but their voices carried clearly. How long is she staying? James asked, his tone suggesting he was referring to an unwelcome houseguest rather than his mother-in-law. She said a week, Rebecca replied. I couldn't exactly say no. It's been 5 years. The garage situation is awkward. Mrs. Pembroke, from next door, saw her coming out this morning and asked if we'd hired new household staff. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Rebecca sighed loudly. What was I supposed to do? Put her in the guest room where the Andersons will stay for the dinner party? You know how Mom is. She doesn't fit with our life here. Well, at least she's not asking for money this time, James muttered. I nearly dropped my glass. Money? I had never asked Rebecca for financial help. Not once in all our years. In fact, it had been the opposite. I'd emptied my meager savings to help with her college expenses not covered by her scholarship. Just keep her occupied and out of sight until the party's over, James continued. Then we can suggest it's time for her to head home. I tiptoed back to the garage, rage and hurt burning in my chest. Was this how they saw me? As an embarrassment to be hidden away? A potential financial burden? The certified check in my purse seemed to grow heavier with irony. That night, as I lay on the uncomfortable cot, I made a decision. I would cut my visit short, but not before I understood exactly where I stood with my daughter. Not before I knew whether there was anything left to salvage, with or without my lottery winnings. The next morning, I found Rebecca alone in the kitchen, preparing organic smoothies for the children's breakfast. Rebecca, do you have a moment to talk? I asked. She glanced at her Apple Watch. I have exactly 7 minutes before I need to wake the kids. What is it? I took a deep breath. I couldn't help overhearing you and James last night. Her eyes widened, but I continued. When have I ever asked you for money? Rebecca's face flushed. Mom, you don't understand the pressure we're under. James's position at the firm. I didn't ask about James's job. I asked when I ever requested financial help from you. She fumbled with the blender lid. Well, there was that time you called about your roof. I called to ask for a recommendation for a reliable contractor, I corrected her. I specifically said I had saved up for the repairs. Fine, maybe not directly, but your situation. It's always been precarious. And showing up now, after 5 years? At your invitation, I reminded her. For her son's birthday, she had called and suggested I might want to visit. It had seemed like an olive branch at the time. Now I wondered if it had been motivated by guilt or obligation. I just don't understand why you're upset about staying in the garage, Rebecca said, changing tactics. It's only temporary, and we're busy with the renovations and the dinner party. I studied my daughter's face, the defensive set of her jaw, the way her eyes couldn't quite meet mine. I realized then that the problem wasn't just about where I slept or what I overheard. It was about shame. Rebecca was ashamed of me, of her roots, of the life we had lived together before James and wealth and status. I think I should leave, I said quietly. For a moment, something like regret flickered across her face. Then she glanced at her watch again and nodded. Maybe that's best. This week is just so hectic with the party, and the contractors are behind. Schedule. She was already making excuses, relieved to have an easy exit from the awkwardness of my presence. It broke my heart all over again. "I'll pack my things and call a taxi," I said. "I can drive you to the bus station after I drop the kids at school," she offered, her tone suggesting this was a generous concession. "That won't be necessary." As I returned to the garage to pack, I struggled with what to do about the money. Part of me wanted to leave without revealing anything, to punish Rebecca for her coldness. Another part recognized that despite everything, I still loved her and my grandchildren. I wanted them to have security, opportunities. But Martin's words echoed in my mind. Money can complicate family relationships. In this case, would it repair what was broken, or would it only paper over the cracks with a veneer of convenience and opportunism? I sat on the cot, holding the certified check in my hands when the garage door opened. It was Emma, still in her pajamas, her small feet bare on the cold concrete floor. "Grandma, are you leaving?" she asked, her lower lip trembling. I patted the space beside me, and she climbed up, snuggling against my side. "Yes, sweetheart. I have some important things to take care of at home." "But you just got here," she protested. "You didn't even see my ballet recital video or the fort Oliver and I built in the backyard." I hugged her tightly, inhaling the sweet scent of her hair. "I know, and I'm sorry about that, but I promise I'll see you again soon." "Pinky promise?" She held out her tiny finger. "Pinky promise," I agreed, linking my finger with hers. Emma spotted the check in my hand. Though she couldn't understand the amount, the official document caught her curiosity. "What's that paper, Grandma?" I hesitated, then made a split-second decision. "It's a surprise for later. Can you keep a secret?" She nodded solemnly. "Sometimes, grown-ups forget what's important," I told her. "They get so busy with work and houses and parties that they forget about love and family. This paper is going to help me remind your mom about what really matters." Emma considered this with the profound seriousness only a 7-year-old can muster. Like how she forgets to come to my bedtime sometimes because she has important calls. My heart cracked a little more. "Yes, something like that." "Emma, what are you doing in here? It's freezing." Rebecca appeared at the garage door, her face a mask of exasperation. "Go inside and get ready for school, now." After Emma scurried off, Rebecca turned to me. "Mom, please don't fill the kids' heads with whatever it is you're telling them. We have a structure here, a routine." I stood up, suddenly tired of walking on eggshells. "A structure that doesn't include bedtime stories?" Rebecca's eyes flashed. "Don't you dare judge my parenting. You have no idea what it takes to raise children in this environment, with these expectations. You never had to balance career and family the way I do." "No," I agreed. "I only had to work 3 jobs to keep a roof over our heads after your father died. Clearly, that was the easier path." The sarcasm wasn't like me, but something had shifted. Perhaps it was the realization that no amount of money could fix what was broken here, at least not until Rebecca recognized the true problem. She crossed her arms. "I have to get the kids ready. The taxi should be here in 30 minutes. As she turned to leave, I made one last attempt. "Rebecca, do you remember when you were 9 and had pneumonia? How I slept on the floor next to your bed for a week because you were afraid to be alone at night?" She paused, her back still to me. "I didn't do that because I had to," I continued. "I did it because I loved you more than anything in this world. That hasn't changed, even if everything else has." For a moment, I thought I might have reached her. Then her shoulders straightened, and without turning around, she said, "The past is the past, Mom. We all have to move forward." And with that, she closed the garage door, leaving me alone with my memories and my millions. The taxi arrived precisely on time. I placed my suitcase in the trunk and took one last look at the imposing house with its manicured lawn and gleaming windows. Somewhere inside were 3 children I adored and a daughter I barely recognized. "Where to, ma'am?" the driver asked. I had planned to head straight to the bus station to return to Millfield and my simple life, now cushioned by unexpected wealth. But sitting in the back of that taxi, I realized I wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. "The Westport Grand Hotel." "Please?" I said instead. The driver raised an eyebrow at my modest appearance but nodded. "Yes, ma'am." As we pulled away from Oak Ridge Hills, I didn't look back. Instead, I focused on the road ahead and the new plan forming in my mind. Rebecca thought she knew who I was, a simple, unsophisticated woman who didn't belong in her polished world. Perhaps it was time to challenge that perception. Money couldn't buy love or respect, but it could buy me time and opportunity to try one last approach to reconnect with my daughter and grandchildren. And if that failed, well, at least I would have tried everything before walking away for good. The Westport Grand Hotel was exactly as its name suggested. Grand. Crystal chandeliers hung from coffered ceilings, plush carpets muffled footsteps, and discreet staff materialized to assist guests before they even realized they needed help. The young woman at the reception desk gave my worn luggage and casual clothes a quick assessment. "Do you have a reservation, ma'am?" "Not yet," I replied, pulling out my wallet. "I'd like your best available suite, please. For 1 week." Her perfectly shaped eyebrows rose slightly as I handed over my new Platinum credit card, one of the first things Martin had arranged after my win. "Of course, Ms. Jenkins. We have the Lakeview Executive Suite available. It features a separate living area, master bedroom with a king-sized bed, marble bathroom with jacuzzi tub, and a private balcony overlooking the water." "That sounds perfect," I said, enjoying the subtle shift in her demeanor as she processed my payment. "Will anyone be joining you?" she asked. "Not at the moment," I replied. "But I'll need information about your event spaces. I'm planning to host a gathering." Within an hour, I was settled in a suite larger than my entire house. Back in Millfield, floor-to-ceiling windows offered a spectacular view of the lake, and the furniture was so elegant it made me nervous to sit on it at first. I placed a call to Martin, explaining my situation and what I planned to do next. "Are you sure about this, Ellie?" he asked after listening patiently. "It sounds like your daughter's issues run deeper than money can fix." "I know," I acknowledged, "but I need to try one more approach before I give up. I'm not using the money to buy her affection. I'm using it to get her attention, to create an opportunity for real conversation." "And if it doesn't work?" I gazed out at the peaceful lake. "Then at least I'll know I did everything possible. And I'll focus on building a relationship with my grandchildren directly as they get older." After hanging up, I made a series of calls to exclusive caterers, event planners, and boutiques. By evening, I had set my plan in motion, a dinner party of my own, scheduled for the night before Rebecca's important event with James's colleagues. The next morning, engraved invitations were delivered to select residents of Oak Ridge Hills, including Rebecca and James, of course, but also the neighbors whose opinions they valued so highly. The invitation simply stated that Eleanor Jenkins requested the pleasure of their company for dinner at the Westport Grand Hotel's Lakeside Ballroom, black tie optional. No explanation, no context. Then I went shopping. A personal stylist helped me select an elegant wardrobe that flattered my figure without trying to make me look younger than my 60 years. I chose classics with subtle touches of luxury: cashmere, silk, fine wool. Nothing flashy, nothing that screamed nouveau riche, but everything of unmistakable quality. My phone rang just after noon. Rebecca's name flashed on the screen. "Mom? What is this invitation? Is this some kind of joke?" Her voice was tight with confusion and annoyance. "Hello, Rebecca. No, it's not a joke. I'm hosting a dinner party tomorrow evening." "At the Westport Grand? That's absurd. How are you paying for this? Did you max out your credit cards? Because James and I won't..." My finances are not your concern, I interrupted calmly. The event is fully paid for. I hope you and James can attend. This doesn't make any sense, she persisted. You were just sleeping in our garage, and now you're hosting a dinner party at the most expensive hotel in town. What's going on? I think that's a conversation best had in person, don't you? Perhaps you and James could come early tomorrow evening, say 6 p.m., before the other guests arrive at 7:30. Suite 1506. There was a long pause. I could almost hear the wheels turning in her head, trying to make sense of this sudden transformation. Fine, she finally said. We'll be there. But Mom, if this is some kind of… I don't even know what. It won't end well. I understand your skepticism, I replied. I'll see you tomorrow. The morning of the dinner party dawned bright and clear. I woke up in the plush king-sized bed of my suite, momentarily disoriented by the luxury surrounding me. For a woman who had spent her entire life pinching pennies, the transition was jarring. I ran my hand over the silky sheets and gazed out at the lake, wondering if I was making a mistake with my plan. Would confronting Rebecca this way drive her further away? Or would it finally make her see me, truly see me for the first time in years? I ordered room service for breakfast, something I'd never done before, and ate on the balcony, watching boats glide across the water. My phone buzzed with text notifications, the event planner confirming final details, the florist double-checking my preferences for centerpieces, the chef requesting approval for menu adjustments. It was strange having people defer to me. Wait, for my decisions, treat me as if my opinions mattered. For decades, I'd been invisible. The school secretary everyone took for granted. The single mother struggling to make ends meet. The embarrassing parent hidden away in the garage. Now, with nothing but my financial status changed, doors opened, voices softened, respect materialized out of thin air. Money didn't just talk. It transformed how the world saw you. The irony wasn't lost on me. At noon, there was a knock at my door. The hair and makeup artist I'd hired had arrived, along with a manicurist. Another first for me. I'd always cut my own hair or gone to the budget salon in Millfield where a trim cost $20. Manicures were an unimaginable luxury. We'll make you look fabulous, the stylist promised, eyeing my simple bob and minimal makeup with professional assessment. Natural but elevated, elegant without trying too hard. As they worked, I closed my eyes and thought about Rebecca. When she was little, we used to have special beauty parlor days at home. I'd wrap a towel around her shoulders, pretend to snip her curls with my fingers, and apply a touch of my lipstick to her giggling mouth. You're the prettiest girl in the whole wide world, I'd tell her, and she'd beam at me like I'd handed her the moon. When had that adoring child transformed into a woman who was ashamed of her own mother? Was it during those college years, when she'd been surrounded by wealth and privilege for the first time? Or was it more gradual? Tiny moments of embarrassment accumulating like interest, compounding over time until the debt of shame was too large to ignore? I knew some of it was my fault. I'd raised her to believe education and social mobility were paramount, that success meant moving beyond our humble circumstances. I'd never expected that moving beyond would mean moving away from me entirely. By 5 o'clock, I was ready. The stylist had shaped my silver gray hair into a sophisticated style that framed my face. My makeup was subtle but flawless, enhancing my features without trying to hide my age. The navy blue dress I'd chosen, a simple but exquisitely tailored sheath with a matching jacket, made me look refined without appearing to try too hard. At precisely 6, there was a knock at the door. I took a deep breath, smoothed my dress, and went to answer it. Rebecca and James stood in the hallway, both dressed formally but with identical expressions of suspicious confusion. Rebecca's eyes widened as she took in my appearance. Mom? The single word contained volumes of disbelief. Please come in, I said, stepping aside. They entered the suite cautiously, as if expecting some kind of trap. James whistled softly as he registered, the luxury of the accommodations. Would you like something to drink? I asked, gesturing to the bar cart the hotel had provided. There's champagne chilling, or I can order whatever you prefer. What is going on? Rebecca demanded, ignoring my offer. First you're sleeping in our garage, then you disappear, and now you're in a 5-star hotel throwing dinner parties for our neighbors. Did you rob a bank? I smiled slightly. Not quite. Please, sit down. We have some time before the other guests arrive. They perched stiffly on the edge of the sofa while I took the armchair opposite. For a moment, we just looked at each other across the coffee table, a visual standoff. I decided to break the silence. 3 weeks ago, I won the lottery, I said simply. James blinked rapidly. Rebecca's mouth fell open. The multi-state Powerball. After taxes, the lump sum payment came to $2 million. That's impossible, Rebecca said automatically. I've played the same numbers for 30 years. Your father's birthday and our anniversary. 3 weeks ago, they finally hit. If this is true, James said slowly, why didn't you tell us right away? Why come to our house and sleep in the garage without saying anything? I looked directly at my daughter, because I wanted to know if you still had room in your life for me. Not my money, but me. I wanted to see if our relationship could be repaired on its own terms before financial considerations complicated things. Rebecca's face flushed. So, this was some kind of test? You were playing games with us? No, Rebecca. I was protecting myself. The last time we were together, you introduced me as your childhood nanny because you were ashamed of having a housekeeper for a mother. You made it clear I didn't fit into your world. I needed to know if anything had changed. And clearly, it hasn't, she shot back. Since you're now staging this. This spectacle to what? Humiliate us in front of our neighbors? I shook my head sadly. That's not my intention at all. I don't want to humiliate anyone. I simply want to be acknowledged as your mother, not hidden away, not erased from your narrative because I'm inconvenient to the image you want to project. James cleared his throat. Ellie, let's be practical here. If what you're saying is true, this changes everything. Obviously, the past is the past, and we can move forward with a clean slate. I turned to look at him, taking in his practiced smile and calculating eyes. Does it change everything, James? Does having money suddenly make me worthy of respect, of a place in your home and your lives that isn't the garage? He had the grace to look uncomfortable, but Rebecca wasn't backing down. You still don't understand, do you? Our life here isn't just about money. It's about fitting in, about maintaining certain standards. You showing up like this, throwing a party for people you don't even know. It's exactly the kind of thing that makes it difficult to include you. Her words stung, but they also clarified things. What standards would those be, Rebecca? The standard that says it's acceptable to make your mother sleep next to your car. The standard that says it's fine to lie to your children about why their grandmother isn't in their lives? The standard that measures a person's worth by their bank account rather than their character? Rebecca's eyes filled with tears, of anger or shame, I couldn't tell. That's not fair. You have no idea the pressure we're under, the expectations. I know exactly what it's like to face crushing expectations, I interrupted, my voice steady. I raised you alone on a secretary's salary after your father died. Do you think that was easy? Do you think I never wanted more, dreamed of more? But I never ever made you feel that you were a burden or an embarrassment. I celebrated every part of you, even when it meant sacrificing my own needs. The room fell silent. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the lake. In that moment, I felt a curious sense of peace. Whatever happened next, I had spoken my truth. James was the first to recover. "So, what happens now?" he asked pragmatically. "What do you want from us?" "I don't want anything from you, James," I replied. "From Rebecca, I want acknowledgement. I want her to see me as a person worthy of basic dignity, regardless of my financial status. I want a relationship with my grandchildren based on love, not convenience." "And the dinner party?" Rebecca asked, her voice smaller now. "The dinner party is happening regardless. I've invited your neighbors because they're important to you, and I wanted to meet them properly. Not as someone to be ashamed of, but as myself. You're welcome to stay and join us, or you can leave. That's entirely your choice." Rebecca stood up abruptly. "I need some air." She walked out onto the balcony, leaving James and me alone. He studied me with new interest. "You've changed," he said. "Not really," I replied. "I'm the same person I've always been. You're just seeing me clearly for the first time." He nodded slowly. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry about the garage. That was inappropriate." "Yes, it was," I agreed, offering nothing more. His apology felt calculated rather than genuine, a hedge against potential financial consequences rather than true remorse. After a few minutes, Rebecca returned, her face composed but her eyes red-rimmed. "The neighbors will be arriving soon," she said tightly. "What exactly do you plan to tell them?" "The truth," I replied, "that I won the lottery and wanted to celebrate with my daughter and her family." "And will you also tell them you were sleeping in our garage 2 days ago?" Her voice was bitter. I sighed. "Rebecca, I have no interest in embarrassing you. This dinner isn't about revenge or public shaming. It's about reclaiming my place in your life, if you still want me to have one." She looked away, conflict evident in her expression. "And the money?" she finally asked. "What do you plan to do with it?" "I've already set up college funds for Sophia, Emma, and Oliver," I said. "Beyond that, I haven't decided. I have enough for my needs. The rest depends on what kind of relationship we build from here." Before she could respond, there was a knock at the door. The event coordinator had arrived to inform me that everything was ready in the ballroom downstairs. The first guests would be arriving in 20 minutes. "It's time to decide," I told Rebecca and James. "Are you staying?" They exchanged a glance, some unspoken communication passing between them. Finally, Rebecca nodded stiffly. "We'll stay." "Thank you," I said sincerely. "That means a lot to me." As we took the elevator down to the ballroom, I felt both nervous and oddly liberated. For decades, I had defined myself through the lens of sacrifice. What I gave up for Rebecca, what I went without so she could have more. Tonight, I was stepping into a new identity, not just as a lottery winner, but as a woman who valued herself enough to demand respect. The ballroom was transformed exactly as I had envisioned, elegant but not ostentatious, with soft lighting, beautiful floral arrangements, and a string quartet playing quietly in the corner. The caterers had set up stations featuring elevated versions of comfort food, a nod to my simple roots paired with Rebecca's more sophisticated palate. The first guests arrived, the Pembrooks from next door who had mistaken me for household staff. Mrs. Pembroke did a double take when Rebecca introduced me as her mother. I smiled warmly and welcomed them as if we'd never met before. More neighbors trickled in, all curious about this unexpected hostess. I greeted each one graciously, watching their initial skepticism transform into careful interest as they realized I wasn't going to embarrass myself, or by extension, Rebecca. James, ever the social chameleon, quickly recovered his equilibrium and began working the room, laughing and chatting as if this had all been planned for months. Rebecca remained tense, hovering nearby as if ready to intervene should I commit some unforgivable faux pas. Dinner was served, and I found myself seated between Mrs. Pembroke and a judge who lived at the end of Rebecca's street. The conversation flowed surprisingly easily. I didn't pretend to be someone I wasn't. I spoke honestly about my years as a school secretary, about raising Rebecca alone after my husband died, about the simple pleasures of my life in Millfield. "How extraordinary that you won the lottery," Mrs. Pembroke said, sipping her wine. "What a stroke of luck." "I've always been lucky in the ways that matter," I replied. "Having a wonderful daughter, healthy grandchildren. The money is just a bonus." Across the table, I caught Rebecca watching me, her expression unreadable. After dinner, as guests mingled with coffee and dessert, I noticed James deep in conversation with my financial advisor, Martin, whom I'd invited as a courtesy. From James's animated gestures and Martin's polite but reserved responses, I could guess the nature of their discussion. James was fishing for details about my financial arrangements. Later, as the evening was winding down, Rebecca found me near the doors to the terrace. "Everyone's loving your party," she said, her tone a mixture of surprise and something that might have been grudging admiration. "Mrs. Reynolds asked if you might consider joining their garden club." I laughed softly. I kill every plant I touch. But it was kind of her to ask. Rebecca fidgeted with her bracelet. "Mom, about what happened at the house?" "Yes?" It wasn't." She struggled to find the words. "Things have been complicated between us for so long I didn't know how to." I waited, giving her space to collect her thoughts. "I handled it badly," she finally said. "The garage, that was. I shouldn't have done that." It wasn't exactly an apology, but it was a start. "No, you shouldn't have," I agreed. "Just as I shouldn't have kept my lottery win a secret. We both made mistakes." She nodded, looking across the room to where James was now chatting with another couple. "It's not just about the money, you know. It's never been just about that." "I know." When I left for college, I felt so out of place. Everyone else seemed to know things I didn't. What fork to use, which wines to order, how to make small talk about vacations in places I'd never heard of. I was terrified of being exposed as an imposter. Her voice wavered slightly. "I worked so hard to fit in, to learn all the unwritten rules, and then when I'd visit home, you'd see everything you were trying to leave behind," I finished, for her. "It sounds horrible when you put it like that," she whispered. "It sounds human," I corrected gently. "We all want to belong, Rebecca. The question is what we're willing to sacrifice to make that happen." She looked at me directly for the first time that evening, really looked at me. "I sacrificed you," she said, the words barely audible. "I thought I had to choose between the life I'd built and my relationship with you. I convinced myself it was necessary." My throat tightened with emotion. This was the closest we'd come to a real conversation in years. "And now?" I asked. "Now I don't know," she admitted. "This," she gestured around the ballroom, "changes the equation, but it doesn't solve the underlying problem." "Which is?" "That I don't know how to be both the person I've become and your daughter at the same time." Her honesty hurt, but it was also refreshing after years of polite distance and unspoken resentments. "Perhaps we need to get to know each other again," I suggested. "As we are now, not as we remember each other being." Before she could respond, James appeared at her side, his smile tight around the edges. "Darling, the Andersons are leaving. We should say goodbye." Rebecca hesitated, then nodded. "We'll talk more tomorrow?" she asked me. "I'd like that," I replied. As the last guest departed, I found myself alone in the ballroom with the event, staff cleaning up around me. The evening had gone better than I'd expected in some ways, worse in others. Rebecca had acknowledged the wrongness of her actions, but she still saw our relationship as fundamentally problematic. The money hadn't magically fixed decades of drift and distance. I returned to my suite feeling emotionally drained, but also strangely hopeful. At least we were finally having honest conversations after years of superficial interactions and growing resentment. The next morning, I slept late, exhausted from the emotional intensity of the previous day. When I finally checked my phone, I found several missed calls and messages from Rebecca. "Mom, can we meet for breakfast? Just us. Are you awake yet? Please call me when you get this. Mom, it's important. Call me." I called her immediately, worried by the urgency in her texts. "Rebecca, is everything all right? Can you come to the house?" she asked, her voice sounding strained. "We need to talk in person." "Of course. Is everyone okay? The children?" "Everyone's fine. It's just, there's something you should know, something I need to tell you." An hour later, my taxi pulled up outside Rebecca's house. The property looked different somehow. Still impressive, but less intimidating now that I'd seen behind the perfect facade to the insecurities it concealed. Rebecca opened the door before I could knock. Her face was pale, her eyes puffy as if she'd been crying. "Come in," she said, stepping aside. James took the kids to his parents' house for the day. I followed her to the kitchen, where 2 cups of coffee waited on the island. We sat, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. "I need to tell you something," Rebecca finally said, staring into her coffee cup. "Something I've never told anyone." I waited, sensing this wasn't the moment for questions. "Do you remember my junior year of college, when I suddenly switched from pre-med to business?" she asked. I nodded. It had been a surprise. Rebecca had been passionate about becoming a doctor since childhood. "I told you it was because I realized medicine wasn't for me, that I was more interested in the business side of healthcare." She took a shaky breath. "That wasn't true." "What happened?" I asked gently. "I was failing organic chemistry. Not just struggling, failing badly. My scholarship had a GPA requirement and I was going to lose it." Her voice cracked. "I was too ashamed to tell you. You were so proud of me, working so hard to help with expenses. I couldn't bear to disappoint you." "Oh, Rebecca," I murmured, reaching across to touch her hand. I met James right around then. His family had connections, influence. They helped me switch majors without penalties, made some calls to ensure my scholarship transferred. She finally looked up at me, her eyes swimming with tears. I told myself it was just networking, using available resources. But deep down, I knew it was wrong, that I hadn't earned it. I squeezed her hand. "We all make mistakes, especially when we're young and scared." "That was just the beginning," she continued. "James's family opened doors I never could have accessed on my own. Internships, job opportunities, social connections. The more doors they opened, the more terrified I became of losing it all, of being exposed as unworthy." "Is that why you started pulling away from me?" I asked. "Because I reminded you of who you were before?" She nodded miserably. "Every time I looked at you, I saw the person I'd been. The girl from a small town with big dreams and no connections. It was easier to keep you at a distance than to reconcile those 2 parts of myself. And when I showed up at your house this week, it was like all my worlds colliding at once. I panicked." A tear slipped down her cheek. "I'm so sorry, Mom. What I did was unforgivable." I moved around the island and wrapped my arms around her. She stiffened at first, then melted into my embrace, sobbing against my shoulder like she hadn't done since she was a child. "I forgive you," I whispered, stroking her hair. "I just want my daughter back." We stayed like that for a long time, the years of distance and resentment slowly dissolving in the healing balm of truth and tears. When Rebecca finally pulled back, wiping her eyes, she looked lighter somehow, as if a burden had been lifted. "There's something else," she said, her voice steadier now. "James isn't happy about what I'm about to tell you." "What is it?" "After you left yesterday morning, we had a huge fight. I told him I was ashamed of how we treated you, that I wanted to make things right." He said, She hesitated. He said now that you had money, we should be strategic about rebuilding our relationship. Make sure we were positioned to benefit from your good fortune. I wasn't entirely surprised, but the confirmation of James's mercenary attitude still disappointed me. I see. It made me realize something, Rebecca continued. I've been making the same mistake for years, measuring everything and everyone, including myself, by their strategic value rather than their intrinsic worth. Just like James and his family do. And now? I asked. Now I want to change that, starting with us. She squared her shoulders. I told James either he supports my decision to rebuild a real relationship with you, one based on love and respect, not financial calculations, or we need to reevaluate our marriage. That's a big step, I said carefully. It's long overdue. Rebecca took a deep breath. Mom, would you consider staying here for the rest of your visit? Not in the garage, she added quickly, but in our actual guest room. It's ready now. The renovations were finished days ago. The invitation was simple, yet it represented everything I'd hoped for when I'd first arrived at her doorstep. Acknowledgement, inclusion, respect. I'd like that very much, I said, smiling through my own tears now. Later that afternoon, as Rebecca helped me bring my luggage from the hotel to her house, I thought about the strange journey of the past few days. The lottery win that had given me financial security had also, indirectly, created the opportunity for emotional healing. Not because money could buy love, it couldn't, but because it had disrupted the patterns of our relationship just enough to force honest conversations. The kids will be so excited you're staying, Rebecca said as we entered the house. Especially Emma. She's been asking about you constantly. I've missed them, I replied. All of you. Rebecca paused at the foot of the stairs, looking at me with a mixture of regret and hope. We have a lot of time to make up for. We have now, I said simply. That's what matters. As we carried my bags up to the guest room, a beautiful space with a comfortable bed, fresh flowers, and a view of the garden, I thought about the certified check still tucked away in my purse. The money that had seemed so important just days ago now felt almost incidental to the real wealth I'd discovered, the chance to reclaim my relationship with my daughter and be a grandmother to her children. That evening, when the children returned home, Emma ran straight into my arms. Grandma, you're still here, she exclaimed, her face alight with joy. I'm staying for a while, sweetie, I told her, holding her close. In the garage? She whispered, her little brow furrowing with concern. No, I laughed. In the guest room upstairs. She nodded solemnly. That's good. It's too cold in the garage, and there are spiders. Rebecca, overhearing this exchange, winced visibly. But when our eyes met over Emma's head, her expression conveyed genuine remorse and the promise of change. Later, after the children were in bed, Rebecca and I sat on the patio with glasses of wine. The evening was warm, fireflies dancing at the edges of the carefully landscaped yard. Mom, Rebecca said after a comfortable silence, what are you going to do with the money? I mean, I know you've set up college funds for the kids, which is incredibly generous, but what about the rest? I haven't decided entirely, I admitted. I've always wanted to travel. Nothing extravagant, just seeing places I've only read about. The Grand Canyon, the Maine coastline, maybe Paris someday. That sounds wonderful, she said sincerely. You deserve it. I'm also thinking about setting up a scholarship fund at Millfield High, I continued. For students like you were, bright, ambitious, but without financial advantages. Something to help bridge the gap between talent and opportunity. Rebecca nodded, her eyes bright with emotion. Dad would have loved that idea. He would have, I agreed, remembering Daniel's passionate belief in education as the great equalizer. Whatever you decide, Rebecca said, reaching for my hand. I want you to know I'm proud of you. Not because of the money, she added quickly, but because of who you are. I lost sight of that for a while, but I never stopped loving you. The words I'd longed to hear for so many years brought fresh tears to my eyes. I love you too, sweetheart. Always have. Always will. As we sat, hand in hand under the stars, I reflected on the strange twist of fate that had brought us to this moment. The lottery win that had made me wealthy beyond my wildest dreams. The garage that had broken my heart, but ultimately created the crisis needed for healing. The truth that had finally been spoken after years of silence. Money could buy comfort, security, even influence. But the real treasures in life, love, forgiveness, connection, those couldn't be purchased at any price. They had to be earned through honesty, vulnerability, and the courage to face difficult truths. The garage that had been meant to humble me had instead become the catalyst for my daughter's awakening. And my lottery win, while life-changing, wasn't the biggest stroke of luck I'd experienced that week. That honor belonged to the reconciliation with Rebecca, a jackpot of the heart worth more than all the millions in my bank account. The morning after our heart-to-heart on the patio, I woke to the sound of children's laughter floating through the open window of the guest room. For a moment, I lay still, savoring the sweetness of that sound and the comfort of the bed beneath. Me, so different from the cot in the garage where I'd spent my first nights in this house. The contrast wasn't lost on me. I dressed and made my way downstairs, following the laughter to the kitchen. Emma and Oliver sat at the island, giggling as Rebecca attempted to make pancakes in the shape of animals. Sophia was setting the table, carefully placing napkins beside each plate. "Good morning," I said, pausing in the doorway to take in the scene. "Grandma!" Emma squealed, hopping down from her stool to run toward me. "Mommy's making elephant pancakes, but they look like blobs." Rebecca turned from the stove, spatula in hand, her cheeks flushed with cooking heat and something that looked like happiness. "Mom, perfect timing. Can you help me salvage these? I'm clearly not the pancake artist you are." The simple request, asking for my help with something she knew I could do well, felt like another small step in rebuilding our relationship. I washed my hands and joined her at the stove, gently taking the spatula. "The trick is to use a squeeze bottle," I explained, demonstrating with the batter. "And you have to work quickly before it spreads too much." Soon, we had a stack of recognizable animal shapes: elephants, bears, even a passable giraffe that made Oliver clap with delight. We all sat down to breakfast together, the children chattering about school and friends and the thousand little details that make up a child's universe. "Where's James?" I asked, noticing his absence. A shadow crossed Rebecca's face briefly. "He left early for the office. He has a lot of work to prepare for tonight's dinner party." "The big partner event," I remembered. "What time will it start?" "Guests arrive at 7, Rebecca replied, helping Emma cut her pancakes. "The caterers will be here at 3 to set up. It's a lot of pressure. The senior partners will be evaluating James, deciding whether to move him up." I heard the tension in her voice, the familiar stress of a social event where appearances mattered deeply. For Rebecca and James, these weren't just dinner parties. They were carefully orchestrated performances aimed at advancement, acceptance, belonging. "Is there anything I can do to help?" I offered. Rebecca looked surprised, then grateful. "Actually, yes. Could you take the kids to the park this afternoon? It would be easier to get everything ready without them underfoot." "I'd love to," I said, warmed by the trust implicit in this request. 3 days ago, she wouldn't have considered letting me take the children anywhere alone. After breakfast, Rebecca retreated to her home office for a conference call, and I found myself alone with my grandchildren for the first time in years. Sophia, at 10, was initially reserved, observing me with cautious eyes as if trying to determine what role I might play in her life. The twins, less burdened by history, were more immediately accepting. "Grandma, do you want to see my rock collection?" Oliver asked, taking my hand and pulling me toward his room. For the next hour, I was treated to a tour of their treasures, Oliver's, rocks and minerals, Emma's stuffed animals, each with a name and elaborate backstory, and finally, with some reluctance, Sophia's bookshelf filled with worn paperbacks. "Mom says you used to read to her every night," Sophia said, running her finger along the spines of her books. "I did," I confirmed. "It was our special time together." "What was she like? When she was my age?" The question surprised me, not because it was unusual for a child to wonder about their parents' childhood, but because it suggested Rebecca rarely spoke about her past with her daughter. "She was a lot like you, actually," I said, sitting on the edge of Sophia's bed. "Smart, serious, always thinking about big questions. But she also loved to laugh and play. She collected bottle caps, had hundreds of them organized by color and design." "Mom collected bottle caps?" Sophia repeated, clearly struggling to reconcile this image with the polished, perpetually busy woman she knew. "She did. And she wrote stories about a girl detective who solved neighborhood mysteries." Sophia's eyes widened. "Mom wrote stories?" I nodded, smiling at the memory. "She had notebooks full of them. I might still have some packed away in my attic back home. Could I read them sometime? I'll look for them when I go back," I promised. "Maybe we could read them together." A tentative smile brightened Sophia's face, the first genuine one she'd directed at me since my arrival. It felt like a tiny miracle. The morning passed in a blur of stories and games. I taught Emma how to make paper dolls the way I'd shown Rebecca decades ago. Oliver and I built a magnificent castle from his blocks. Even Sophia joined in eventually, showing me the science project she was working on for school, a solar system model with painstakingly painted planets. Around noon, Rebecca emerged from her office looking harried. "Everything okay?" I asked as she poured herself a cup of coffee. "The florist called. They don't have the orchids James specified for the centerpieces. It's a small thing, but he's been so on edge about tonight." She rubbed her temples. "And the caterer wants to substitute the Chilean sea bass with halibut because of quality concerns." "Will James mind the switch?" Rebecca sighed. "Ordinarily no, but he's been obsessing over every detail. The senior partner's wife mentioned once that she loves sea bass, so James specifically planned the menu around it." I could hear the strain in her voice, the familiar tension of trying to manage not just logistics, but her husband's expectations and anxieties. "Maybe the change will be for the better," I suggested gently. "Sometimes, the best experiences come from unexpected substitutions." She gave me a wry smile. "That's a very Eleanor way of looking at it." "I'm nothing if not consistent." We shared a laugh, and for a moment I glimpsed the easy rapport we'd once had, before college and status and social climbing had created a gulf between us. After lunch, I took the children to the park as promised. It was a beautiful day, the sky a perfect blue, trees just beginning to hint at autumn colors. Emma and Oliver raced toward the playground equipment while Sophia walked beside me, still somewhat reserved but warming gradually. "Mom says you won a lot of money," she said abruptly as we settled on a bench to watch the twins. I nodded, unsurprised that Rebecca had explained my sudden change in circumstances. I did. It was very unexpected. "Is that why you're staying in the guest room now instead of the garage?" The directness of her question, its implicit understanding of the situation, caught me off guard. Children absorb so much more than adults realize. "No, sweetheart," I said carefully. "I'm staying in the guest room because your mom and I had a good talk about family and what's important. The money doesn't change who I am or how much I love you all." Sophia considered this, her small face serious. "But it changed how Mom treats you." Out of the mouths of babes. I struggled with how to answer honestly without undermining Rebecca's authority or Sophia's trust in her mother. Sometimes, I began slowly, grown-ups make mistakes because they're afraid or confused. Your mom was worried about fitting in with her new life, and sometimes that made it hard for her to remember what really matters. The money didn't change that. Our conversations did. Sophia nodded, seeming to accept this explanation even if she didn't fully understand it. "I'm glad you're here now," she said simply. "Me too, sweetheart. Me too." We spent 2 hours at the park, the children burning off energy while I rediscovered the simple joy of pushing a child on a swing, of catching them at the bottom of a slide, of sharing an ice cream cone from the vendor who set up his cart near the playground. When we returned to the house, it was in full pre-party transformation. The caterers had arrived early and were setting up in the kitchen. Florists were arranging stunning bouquets throughout the downstairs. A small army of cleaners was making every surface gleam. Rebecca met us at the door, her hair freshly styled, wearing a silk blouse and tailored pants. "How was the park?" she asked, helping Emma remove her jacket. "Magnificent," I replied. "These three are natural adventurers." "Mom, Grandma let us have ice cream before dinner," Oliver announced proudly. Rebecca raised an eyebrow at me. "Just a small cone," I said, feeling suddenly like I'd overstepped. I hope that was okay. To my relief, Rebecca smiled. "Of course it's okay. Grandmas are supposed to break the rules sometimes." The simple acknowledgement that I was their grandmother, with all the privileges that role traditionally entailed, meant more to me than she could know. "Kids, time to get cleaned up," Rebecca continued. "Baths for everyone, then quiet time while Mommy finishes getting the house ready." "Can Grandma read to us?" Emma asked, clutching my hand. Rebecca hesitated only briefly. "If she'd like to." "I'd love to," I assured them. For the next hour, I supervised baths and helped 3 children into clean clothes. Then we piled onto Oliver's bed with a stack of books, and I read story after story, doing all the character voices the way I used to for Rebecca, until Emma and Oliver were drowsy with contentment. Sophia, deemed too old for naps by mutual agreement, retreated to her room with a book of her own. I tucked the twins in for short naps and went downstairs to see if Rebecca needed help with the party preparations. I found her in the dining room, rearranging place cards with a furrowed brow. "Everything looks beautiful," I said, admiring the transformed space. "Thanks." She sighed, shifting 2 cards again. James texted that Miles Harrington, the head of the firm, specifically asked if Arthur Chen would be seated near him. They apparently share an interest in vintage sailing vessels. So now I'm trying to rearrange everyone without disrupting the whole dynamic of the table. "May I?" I asked, gesturing to the cards. Rebecca nodded, looking relieved to hand off the puzzle. I studied the placement for a few minutes, getting a sense of the dynamics involved. If we move Mrs. Harrington here, next to Mrs. Chen, they can discuss the charity auction they're both working on. I heard you mention it yesterday. Then Mr. Harrington and Mr. Chen are diagonal from each other, close enough for conversation, but not isolated from everyone else. Rebecca looked impressed. "That works perfectly. How did you know about the charity auction connection?" "I pay attention," I said simply. "It's what I did for years as a school secretary. Watch how people interact, remember the details they share, understand the relationships. I never thought about it that way," Rebecca admitted. "I always imagined your job was mostly paperwork and answering phones." "There was plenty of that," I agreed. "But the heart of the work was people. Knowing which teacher needed a gentle reminder about reports due, which parent was going through a divorce and might need extra patience, which student was having a bad day and could use a quiet place to regroup." Harsh, Rebecca looked at me with new eyes. "You were good at it, weren't you?" "I was," I said, allowing myself a moment of pride. "Very good, actually." We continued working together, Rebecca explaining the significance of various guests while I helped with final touches around the house. It felt natural, collaborative, a mother and daughter preparing for company, the way it should be. At 5, James returned home, his expression tight with stress. "Is everything ready?" he asked, barely acknowledging my presence as he surveyed the dining room. "Everything's perfect," Rebecca assured him. "The florist brought peonies instead of orchids, but they're actually more elegant." James frowned slightly but nodded. "And the sea bass issue?" "Resolved," Rebecca said smoothly, without specifying how. "Good." He loosened his tie. "I need to shower and change. Miles mentioned he might arrive a few minutes early." As he headed upstairs, Rebecca caught my eye with a small conspiratorial smile. I returned it, appreciating her decision to manage James's stress rather than add to it with details about the menu change. "I should get ready too," I said, "and then check on the children." Rebecca touched my arm lightly. "Thank you for your help today, Mom, with everything." The simple expression of gratitude warmed me through. "That's what mothers do," I replied. In the guest room, I laid out the outfit I'd chosen for the evening. Another classic dress, this one in deep emerald. As I dressed, I thought about Rebecca's comment regarding James's stress. It was clear their marriage operated on a precarious balance of ambition, expectation, and performance. I wondered how much of Rebecca's earlier treatment of me had been influenced by that dynamic, by the pressure to present a certain image to the world, even at the cost of authentic relationships. By 6:30, the house was ready. The twins and Sophia had been fed an early dinner and were settled in the upstairs playroom with a movie and strict instructions to stay put unless there was an emergency. A young woman named Ava, their regular babysitter, had arrived to supervise them. I came downstairs to find Rebecca in the living room, stunning in a black cocktail dress, arranging fresh flowers in a vase. James stood by the bar cart, mixing himself a bourbon neat. "You look lovely," I told Rebecca. "Thanks, Mom. So do you." James glanced over, seeming to really see me for the first time that day. "Yes, very nice, Ellie." He took a sip of his drink. "Rebecca mentioned you've been helpful with the preparations. We appreciate it." His tone was polite but distant, acknowledging my contribution while maintaining boundaries. I wondered if Rebecca had told him about our conversation the previous day, about her ultimatum regarding their relationship. "Happy to help," I replied simply. The doorbell rang precisely at 7. James straightened his tie, Rebecca smoothed her dress, and the performance began. I watched in quiet fascination as they transformed before my eyes. James becoming more animated, Rebecca more gracious, both of them slipping effortlessly into the polished, charming versions of themselves. Required for the evening. The guests arrived in quick succession. 4 senior partners and their spouses. 2 junior associates James had mentioned were also being evaluated for advancement, and a handful of clients important to the firm. I was introduced as Rebecca's mother, visiting from Millfield, with no mention of my garage accommodations or lottery winnings. Most of the guests greeted me with the distracted politeness reserved for peripheral characters at important gatherings. A handshake, a murmured, "Lovely to meet you," then a quick pivot back to more consequential conversations. I didn't mind. It gave me the freedom to observe, to understand the social currents that had shaped my daughter's life these past years. Miles Harrington, the firm's managing partner, was a study in controlled power, soft-spoken but commanding, his understated gray suit probably costing more than my entire pre-lottery wardrobe. His wife Celeste had the kind of practiced charm that never quite reached her evaluating eyes. "Eleanor," she said when we were introduced, holding my hand a beat longer than necessary. "Rebecca hasn't mentioned you before. Do you visit often?" The subtle probe was expertly delivered, casual enough to seem like small talk, pointed enough to establish my outsider status. Not as often as I'd like, I replied evenly. But I'm hoping to change that. How nice, she murmured, her gaze already drifting past me to more interesting prospects. Throughout dinner, I watched Rebecca navigate the complex social dynamics with impressive skill. She remembered everyone's children's names and activities, steered conversations away from potential landmines, laughed at the right moments, and ensured everyone's wine glass remained appropriately filled. James, too, performed brilliantly. Deferential to the senior partners without seeming obsequious, knowledgeable about firm matters without dominating the conversation. I began to understand how exhausting this life must be. The constant vigilance, the pressure to say exactly the right thing, the fear of a single misstep jeopardizing everything they'd worked for. After dinner, as the party moved into the living room for coffee and dessert, I found myself beside Arthur Chen, the partner who shared Miles Harrington's interest in sailing vessels. Unlike some of the others, he seemed genuinely interested. When I mentioned I was from Millfield, "Millfield? There's a remarkable little maritime museum there, isn't there?" he asked. I stopped there once on a driving tour of the coast. Fascinating collection of ship models built by local craftsmen. The Whitaker Museum, I confirmed, surprised and pleased that he knew of it. It was started by Captain Henry Whitaker, who settled in Millfield after years at sea. The models were originally carved by sailors during long voyages. That's right, Arthur's eyes lit up. There was one ship in particular, a perfect miniature replica of the Empress of China, if I remember correctly. The detailing was extraordinary. It's still there, I told him. In fact, I volunteer at the museum one Saturday a month. Captain Whitaker was my great-grandfather's cousin, so I grew up hearing stories about the collection. You don't say. Arthur was genuinely intrigued now. I had no idea you had such a connection to maritime history. Our conversation attracted Miles Harrington's attention, and soon the three of us were deep in discussion about historical sailing vessels and navigation techniques. It turned out I knew more about the subject than I'd realized, thanks to years of giving tours at the museum and absorbing information from the more knowledgeable docents. Across the room, I caught Rebecca watching us, her expression a mixture of surprise and something that might have been pride. When the guests finally began to depart around 11, Miles Harrington made a point of seeking me out. "Eleanor, it's been a pleasure," he said, shaking my hand warmly. "Arthur tells me you're quite the expert on maritime history. If you're still in town next week, we're hosting a small gathering at our home. There's someone I'd like you to meet, a collector of nautical antiquities who would appreciate your knowledge." "That's very kind," I replied, genuinely touched by the invitation. "Not at all. Any mother who raised a daughter as accomplished as Rebecca must be remarkable in her own right." He glanced toward where Rebecca and James were saying goodbye to other guests. "Your daughter is a tremendous asset to our firm's social circle. Now I see where she gets her charm." After the last guest departed, James collapsed onto the sofa, loosening his tie with a sigh of relief. "I think that went well," he said, reaching for a leftover glass of wine. Miles seemed pleased. Rebecca kicked off her heels and sat beside him. "Better than well. Did you see him with Arthur and Mom discussing those old ships? He was completely engaged." James looked at me with new interest. "What exactly were you talking about with them?" "Just some history about the Maritime Museum in my hometown," I explained. Arthur had visited it once and remembered the ship models. "Miles invited her to their house next week," Rebecca added. James sat up straighter. "He did? That's unexpected." The Harringtons are very selective about their guest lists. I shrugged lightly. I'm sure he was just being polite. "Miles Harrington doesn't do anything just to be polite," James replied, studying me with a recalibrating gaze. "If he invited you, he genuinely wants you there." He hesitated, then added, "Which could actually be quite helpful for my partnership prospects." And there it was, the lens through which James viewed all relationships, not as connections between people, but as strategic advantages to be leveraged. Rebecca must have registered my expression because she quickly jumped in. "What James means is that it's lovely they enjoyed your company so much. You really impressed everyone tonight, Mom." "Thank you," I said, deciding to focus on Rebecca's genuine compliment rather than James's calculating assessment. "It was an interesting evening. I can see why these gatherings are important to you both." James finished his wine and stood up. "I should check in with Miles tomorrow, follow up while tonight is still fresh in his mind." He looked at me with newfound respect, or at least newfound appreciation for my potential utility. "Eleanor, I hope you'll consider attending the Harringtons' gathering. It would be good for the family." After he headed upstairs, Rebecca and I sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both exhausted from the social performance of the evening. "He means well," she said finally. "He just expresses it through achievement and advancement." "I understand," I replied, though I wasn't entirely sure I did, or at least wasn't sure I could accept such a transactional view of human relationships. "You really were amazing tonight," Rebecca continued. "I've never seen Miles that engaged with someone. He just met." "I just talked about something I know a little about," I demurred. "Nothing special." "But it was special," she insisted. "You were yourself, authentic, knowledgeable, unassuming." People responded to that. Her observation struck me as both insightful and somewhat sad. That authenticity would stand out as remarkable in her social circle. "I should check on the children," I said, rising from my chair. "Make sure they're sleeping and not watching a third movie." Rebecca laughed softly. "Probably the latter. Ava's wonderful, but a pushover when it comes to just one more." I found all 3 children asleep in the playroom, Sophia on the sofa. With a book still open beside her, the twins curled together in a nest of blankets on the floor. Ava was reading quietly in the corner. "They tried to wait up for you," she whispered, "but they crashed about an hour ago." "Thank you for watching." "Them?" I said, helping her gather her things. "No problem. They're great kids." She smiled shyly. "They talked about you all night, about the park and ice cream and story time. They seemed really happy you're here." Her simple observation touched me deeply. Whatever complications existed, between Rebecca and me, whatever James's ambitions might entail, my grandchildren's affection was pure and uncalculated. It was a foundation I could build on. After Ava left, I gently woke Sophia and guided her to her room, then carried Emma to her bed. Rebecca appeared in the hallway just as I was about to lift Oliver. "Let me help," she whispered, bending to scoop him up. Together, we tucked the twins into their beds, a synchronized dance of maternal care that felt as natural as breathing. When we stepped back into the hallway, Rebecca's eyes were shining with unshed tears. "What is it?" I asked. Softly. "I just realized," she said, her voice barely audible. "This is what I wanted all along. You and me, taking care of them together. I just got so lost in everything else. I forgot to make room for what really matters." I wrapped my arms around her, and this time, she leaned into the embrace without hesitation. "It's not too late," I whispered against her hair. "We're finding our way back." That night, lying in the comfortable guest room bed, I reflected on the strange journey of the past week. I had arrived with a certified check and a wounded heart, uncertain if there was anything left to salvage with my daughter. Now, just days later, we were taking fragile steps toward reconciliation. The money had opened a door, but it hadn't created the deeper healing that was beginning to unfold. That came from truth-telling, from Rebecca's courage in confronting her shame, from my willingness to listen without judgment. It came from small moments of connection, making pancakes together, reading to the children, working side by side, to prepare for the dinner party. As I drifted toward sleep, I thought about Miles Harrington's unexpected invitation and James's reaction to it. There were still challenges ahead. James's transactional view of relationships, the pressure of their social circle, the ingrained patterns that had driven Rebecca and me apart for so long. But for tonight, at least, I felt hopeful. We had made a beginning. The rest would unfold one conversation, one shared experience, one truthful moment at a time. The week following the dinner party brought a subtle but significant shift in the household dynamics. James, impressed by Miles Harrington's interest in me, began treating me with a newfound deference, not quite warmth, but a respectful acknowledgement that I might be valuable to his professional advancement. It wasn't the relationship I would have chosen with my son-in-law, but it was an improvement over being relegated to the garage. Rebecca and I continued our cautious reconnection, finding moments throughout each day to talk, to share memories, to simply exist in the same space, without the weight of past resentments pressing down on us. The wounds of years weren't healed overnight, but each honest conversation felt like another stitch closing the gap between us. The real joy, though, came from my grandchildren. Free from the complicated history that clouded adult relationships, they embraced my presence with uncomplicated enthusiasm. Sophia began seeking me out in the mornings before school, showing me her homework or telling me about books she was reading. The twins included me in their elaborate imaginative games, assigning me roles as space captain or dragon trainer or royal advisor, depending on the day's theme. On Wednesday morning, I was helping Emma construct a fairy house in the garden when Rebecca joined us, coffee mug in hand. "That's beautiful," she said, admiring the tiny structure made from twigs, moss, and flower petals. "You always were good at creating magical little worlds." I smiled, remembering the fairy villages Rebecca and I used to build in our small backyard in Millfield. Some skills never fade. "Mom, I've been thinking," Rebecca said, settling on the garden bench nearby. "Would you consider extending your visit? Maybe staying through the end of the month?" The invitation caught me by surprise. Originally, I'd planned to stay only a week, a visit that had started with humiliation in the garage and was now transforming into something healing and hopeful. "I'd love to," I replied, touched by the request. "Are you sure James wouldn't mind?" "It was actually his suggestion," Rebecca admitted. "After the Harringtons invited you to their gathering, he thought it would be beneficial for you to attend." I raised an eyebrow. "Beneficial for whom exactly?" Rebecca had the grace to look somewhat embarrassed. "For all of us," he said. "But yes, I know what you're thinking. James is James. He sees advantages where others see relationships." She hesitated. "That doesn't mean he's wrong, though. It would be nice to have you stay longer. For me. For the kids. The other reasons are just extras." I considered her words. James's motives might be calculating, but Rebecca's seemed genuine, and the opportunity to spend more time with my grandchildren was too precious to decline over pride. "I'll need to go home at some point to take care of a few things," I said, "but I can come back." Emma looked up from her fairy construction project, alarm in her small face. "You're leaving, Grandma?" "Just for a few days," I assured her, "to pack some more clothes and check on my house. Then I'll come right back." "Promise?" She held out her pinky, solemn as only a 7-year-old can be. "Promise." I linked my finger with hers, sealing the vow. Rebecca watched our exchange, her expression softening. "The kids have really bonded with you." "They're remarkable little people," I said. "You've done well with them, Rebecca." "Have I?" Uncertainty flickered across her face. "Sometimes I wonder. I'm always rushing, always focused on the next thing, the next school event, the next social obligation, the next career milestone for James. I don't know if I give them enough of myself." It was the most vulnerable she'd been with me since our heart-to-heart after the dinner party. I chose my words carefully, wanting to support without criticizing. All parents question themselves, I told her. I certainly did with you. There were so many times I worried I wasn't doing enough, giving enough, being enough. But love counts for a lot, and your children know they're loved. Did you know? She asked quietly. That I loved you, even when I was the way I was? The question pierced straight to my heart. I hoped, I replied honestly. But there were times I wasn't sure anymore. Rebecca nodded, accepting this truth without defensiveness. I'm sorry for that, for making you doubt. She watched Emma carefully placing a tiny acorn cap as a table in the fairy house. I don't want my children to ever have to wonder. Then make sure they don't, I said simply. Our conversation was interrupted by the arrival of James, dressed for the office in an immaculate suit. Good morning, ladies, he greeted us with unusual cheerfulness. Eleanor, I was just about to call you. Miles Harrington left a message for me at the office. He wanted to confirm you'll be attending their gathering on Saturday. I will, I replied. Rebecca's invited me to extend my stay. Excellent, James beamed. This could be a pivotal opportunity. The Harringtons rarely invite new people into their circle. If you make a good impression. Well, it could open doors for all of us. I struggled not to let my ambivalence show. James's naked ambition made me uncomfortable, but his happiness, at my extended visit, however self-serving, seemed to please Rebecca. I'm happy to attend, I said diplomatically. But I should mention I'll need to make a brief trip home first, to handle a few matters and pack for a longer stay. James frowned slightly. How brief? The Harrington event is in 3 days. I could leave today and be back by Friday, I offered. It's only a 4-hour bus ride each way. Bus? James looked horrified at the thought. No, that won't. Do, take my car. He pulled keys from his pocket and held them out. The black Mercedes in the garage, much more comfortable than public transportation. I hesitated, surprised by the offer. James treasured his luxury vehicle, seldom allowing even Rebecca to drive it. That's very generous, I began. But I insist, James interrupted. We're family after all. The words sounded strange coming from him, a man who had supported banishing me to the garage just days ago. But his smile was genuine, if calculating. In his mind, I had transformed from embarrassing in-law to potential social asset. It wasn't the most heartwarming basis for acceptance, but it was a start. Thank you, I said, accepting the keys. I'll take good care of it. After James left for work, Rebecca helped me plan my brief trip home. She seemed genuinely sorry to see me go, even for a few days, another small miracle in our evolving relationship. Call when you arrive, she instructed, as I prepared to leave that afternoon. And drive carefully. The coastal road can be foggy this time of year. I will, I promised, touched by her concern. The children were less easily reassured. Sophia, attempting adolescent nonchalance, merely nodded goodbye while clearly fighting disappointment. The twins were more demonstrative, clinging to my legs and extracting multiple promises about my return. 3 sleeps, I told them, bending to hug them close. Just 3 sleeps, and I'll be back with more stories, and maybe a surprise or 2. Pinky promise? Emma insisted, extending her small finger once again. Pinky promise. I linked my finger with hers, then with Oliver's outstretched pinky. I wouldn't miss Uncle Miles's party for anything. He's not really our uncle, Sophia corrected, practical as always. No, but it sounds nicer than Dad's boss who could determine his entire professional future, Rebecca said with a wry smile. Now give Grandma a proper goodbye, Sophia. 3 days will go by quickly. Sophia stepped forward for a quick hug, then surprised me by whispering, "Bring back one of Mom's old notebooks if you find them. The ones with her stories." "I'll look for them," I whispered back, warmed by this evidence of her interest in connecting with her mother's childhood self. The drive to Millfield was peaceful, giving me time to reflect on the extraordinary changes of the past week. From the indignity of the garage to being loaned James's prized Mercedes, it was a transformation that mirrored my shifting status in their household. Not because of who I was, but because of what I represented: money, social connections, potential advancement. It troubled me, this transactional view of relationships. Yet I couldn't deny that without my lottery win, the garage might have remained my accommodation indefinitely. The money had created an opening, a chance for real healing that might not have come otherwise. It was an uncomfortable truth to acknowledge. My small house in Millfield looked exactly as I'd left it, modest but neat, with cheerful curtains at the windows and potted geraniums on the porch. After the opulence of Rebecca and James's home, its simplicity felt comforting, like a well-worn sweater after days in stiff formal wear. Inside, I was greeted by the familiar scent of lemon polish and the gentle ticking of the grandfather clock that had been my parents'. I'd been longing for this homecoming, yet now that I was here, I felt oddly untethered, caught between the life I'd known for decades and the new possibilities opening before me. I made a cup of tea and sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by the accumulation of a lifetime. Photographs on the refrigerator, the collection of salt and pepper shakers on open shelving, the faded marks on the door frame where I'd measured Rebecca's height every birthday until she left for college. This was my world, unpretentious, but filled with memories and meaning. How did it fit with the luxury of Rebecca's life, with the social climbing and strategic relationships that defined her marriage to James? Could I bridge these worlds without losing myself in the process? The next morning, I met with Martin Godfrey, my financial advisor, at his modest office above the Millfield Credit Union. He greeted me warmly, obviously curious about my impromptu visit. "How is the family reunion going?" he asked as we settled in his office. "It's evolving," I replied, unsure how to summarize the complicated dynamics of the past week. "Better than it started, at least." Martin nodded, his expression sympathetic. "These transitions take time. Even positive changes like sudden wealth can disrupt established patterns." "That's putting it mildly," I said with a rueful smile. "My son-in-law went from relegating me to the garage to lending me his Mercedes in the space of 4 days. Martin's eyebrows shot up. "The garage? You didn't mention that before." I sighed, filling him in on the details of my initial reception and the subsequent shift after my lottery win became known. "I see," he said when I finished. "And how do you feel about this transformation in their treatment of you?" "Conflicted," I admitted. "I'm glad to have a relationship with my daughter and grandchildren again, but knowing it might never have happened without the money. It's hard to reconcile." "Money changes how people see us," Martin observed, "but it doesn't change who we are. The question is whether this opening, however it came about, can lead to something genuine over time." His words echoed my own thoughts. "That's what I'm hoping for." Which brings me to the reason for my visit. I took a deep breath. I want to set up a trust for my daughter and her family. Something substantial but structured. Martin nodded, pulling a legal pad toward him. "What sort of parameters are you considering?" "I want to ensure financial security for my grandchildren through college and beyond, for Rebecca and James. I'm less certain. I don't want to just hand over money that might reinforce the values I find troubling in their lifestyle, but I also don't want to use financial control as emotional leverage." "Understandable," Martin said. "There are several approaches we could take. A generation-skipping trust for the grandchildren is straightforward. For Rebecca and James, perhaps? A phased approach, some immediate benefit with additional distributions based on timeline rather than conditions. That way you're providing support without setting yourself up as judge of their choices. That sounds reasonable, I agreed. I'd also like to donate a portion to the Millfield School District, maybe a scholarship fund and resources for the arts programs that keep getting cut. We spent the next hour outlining a plan that felt balanced, generous to my family while honoring my values and community connections. When we finished, I felt lighter, clearer about my path forward. One more thing, I said as our meeting drew to a close. I'm thinking about moving. Oh? Martin looked surprised. Leaving Millfield after all these years? Not permanently, I clarified. But I'm considering getting a place closer to Rebecca and the grandchildren. Somewhere I could stay for extended periods without imposing on their household. That sounds like a thoughtful compromise, he said. Let me know when you're ready to explore that option. I can put you in touch with a reliable real estate agent in that area. As I left Martin's office, I felt a sense of purpose I hadn't experienced in years. The lottery win had given me financial freedom, but these decisions about how to use it, how to shape it into a force for connection rather than division, those choices would define the next chapter of my life. Back at my house, I spent the afternoon packing for my extended stay and searching the attic for Rebecca's childhood notebooks. I found them in an old cedar chest, 5 spiral-bound books filled with the adventures of Meredith Monroe, Kid Detective, complete with Rebecca's carefully drawn illustrations. Holding these tangible pieces of my daughter's childhood, before ambition and social climbing had reshaped her priorities, brought tears to my eyes. The girl who had created these stories had been curious, creative, full of wonder. Somewhere, inside the polished, status-conscious woman she'd become, that girl still existed. These notebooks were a bridge to her, one I hoped Sophia might cross. The next morning, as I prepared to leave for the return journey to Rebecca's, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Teresa Gonzalez, my next-door neighbor for the past 15 years, standing on the porch with a foil-covered dish. Chicken enchiladas, she announced without preamble. My grandmother's recipe. For your journey. I smiled, touched by her thoughtfulness. Thank you, Teresa. Come in for a minute. She followed me into the kitchen, glancing around with the comfortable familiarity of a longtime friend. So it's true, then? You're going back to that daughter of yours after all these years? News traveled fast in Millfield, especially when it involved prodigal children and unexpected reconciliations. For a visit, I confirmed. A longer one than planned, but still just a visit. Teresa nodded, settling into a kitchen chair as I poured us both coffee. And how did she receive you? With open arms after all this time? I hesitated, unwilling to share the full humiliation of the garage episode even with a trusted friend. It was awkward at first, I admitted, but we're finding our way back to each other. Teresa's skepticism was evident in that single syllable. And does this sudden reconciliation have anything to do with the rumor that you've come into some money? I nearly choked on my coffee. Where did you hear that? Teresa waved a dismissive hand. Small towns, big ears, Mary at the credit union. Mentioned you'd been meeting with Martin Godfrey and he only handles significant accounts. Plus, you're driving a Mercedes that costs more than most houses in Millfield. I can add 2 and 2, Ellie. I sighed, acknowledging the futility of secrets in a town where everyone knew everyone else's business. Yes, I won the lottery, but that's not why I'm reconnecting with Rebecca. At least not entirely. Teresa studied me over the rim of her coffee cup. Just be careful, mi amiga. Money changes how people see us, not always for the better. It was nearly the same observation Martin had made, a truth so fundamental it transcended professional financial advice to become kitchen table wisdom. I know, I said, but it's also created an opening that might not have come otherwise. I have 3 grandchildren, Teresa. I've missed so much of their lives already. Her expression softened. Ah, nietos. They change everything, don't they? She reached across the table to squeeze my hand. Just remember who you are, Ellie. All that money, it isn't you. The woman who brought soup when I had pneumonia, who watched my cats when I visited my sister in Arizona, who helped my Eduardo with his college applications. That's who you are. Don't let anyone make you forget it. Her words stayed with me as I drove back to Rebecca's that afternoon, the Mercedes purring along the coastal highway. Who was I, really? The school secretary who counted pennies and volunteered at the Maritime Museum? The lottery winner who could now afford luxury hotels and designer clothes? The mother who had been relegated to the garage, or the suddenly valuable social connection to the Harringtons? All of these, perhaps. But Teresa was right. The money wasn't me. It was a tool, a resource, an opportunity. How I used it would reflect my true character far more than the simple fact of having it. I arrived at Rebecca's house just before dinner, pulling into the driveway as the late afternoon sun bathed the impressive facade in golden light. Before I could even open the car door, the front door flew open, and Emma and Oliver raced out, followed more sedately by Sophia. "Grandma, you came back!" Emma cried, flinging herself into my arms as I stepped from the car. "Of course I did," I said, hugging her tightly. "I pinky promised, didn't I?" Oliver tugged at my sleeve. "Did you bring surprises?" I laughed, reaching back into the car for a shopping bag. I might have picked up a few things. Sophia approached more cautiously, but her eyes brightened when I handed her a separate bag. "Are these—" "Your mother's detective notebooks," I confirmed quietly. "All 5 of them." Her smile was worth every mile of the journey. Rebecca appeared in the doorway, watching our reunion with a soft expression. "Welcome back, Mom. The house has been too quiet without you." "That's not what you said when I was listening to heavy metal in the garage," I teased, referencing a joke from my earlier stay that had become something of a family legend. Rebecca laughed, coming down the steps to help with my luggage. "James," called from the office. "He'll be home late, some last-minute preparation for tomorrow's event at the Harringtons." "I hope he's not stressing too much about it," I said as we carried my bags inside. Rebecca rolled her eyes good-naturedly. "You know, James, every social gathering is a strategic operation requiring military-level planning." Her casual critique of her husband's intensity surprised me, a small sign of her growing comfort in being honest with me rather than presenting a perfect facade. Inside, the house smelled deliciously of garlic and roasting chicken. "Something smells wonderful," I commented. "I'm making dinner," Rebecca announced with mock solemnity. "An actual home-cooked meal, not catered or ordered in. The children may not survive the shock." "Mom burned the first batch of garlic bread," Sophia informed me with the brutal honesty of pre-adolescence. "Thank you for that essential update, Sophia," Rebecca said dryly. "Perhaps you'd like to share all my kitchen failures from the past decade while you're at it." Their easy banter was another revelation. Rebecca engaging with her daughter as a real person, rather than an accomplishment to be polished and presented. It felt like a glimpse of what our relationship might have been without the years of distance and resentment. "I brought Teresa's enchiladas," I offered, holding up the foil-covered dish. "They'll keep for another day if you've already got dinner underway." "Teresa from next door?" Rebecca asked, taking the dish. "I remember her. She used to let me help make tamales at Christmas." "She still does," I said, pleased she'd remembered this detail from her childhood. "She has a whole assembly line of grandchildren and neighbors every December." "I'd forgotten that," Rebecca murmured, a faraway look in her eyes. There were a lot of good things about Millfield, weren't there? Things I've lost sight of over the years. It was a simple acknowledgement, but significant. An admission that the life she'd left behind hadn't been all limitation and lacking, that there had been richness there too, of a different kind than she now pursued. Dinner that evening was a relaxed affair. Rebecca's slightly overcooked chicken, which she laughed about rather than agonizing over, fresh vegetables from the farmer's market, and conversation that flowed easily between serious topics and silly ones. The children shared stories from their 3 days without me, while I described my brief return to Millfield. "Is your house like this one, Grandma?" Oliver asked, gesturing around the expansive dining room. "Not quite," I replied with a smile. "It's much smaller, but very cozy. You'd have to share a room if you came to visit." "Can we?" Emma asked eagerly. "Visit your house?" I glanced at Rebecca, uncertain how she'd feel about her children experiencing my modest home after their upbringing amid luxury. "I think that would be wonderful," Rebecca said, surprising me. "Maybe during winter break? We could all go." The invitation, casual but sincere, felt like another small bridge being built between our worlds. After dinner, while Rebecca supervised the children's bedtime routines, I unpacked in the guest room, no longer a temporary accommodation, but a space that felt increasingly like my own. I arranged my clothes in the closet, placed my few toiletries. In the elegant bathroom, set a framed photo of Rebecca as a child on the nightstand. Small gestures of belonging, of establishing presence. Not quite home, but no longer foreign territory either. Just as I finished, Rebecca knocked lightly on the doorframe. "Everyone's finally settled," she said, looking tired but content. "Sophia's reading those notebooks by flashlight under her covers." I didn't have the heart to stop her. "I found them in the old cedar chest," I told her. "You were quite the storyteller at her age." Rebecca smiled, a hint of wistfulness in her expression. "I'd forgotten about those. Meredith Monroe and her endless mysteries." "They were good stories," I said. "Creative, detailed. You had a real gift." "I haven't written anything like that in years," she admitted. "Not since college, really. Law school and then marriage and children. There never seemed to be time for creative pursuits." "There's still time," I suggested gently. "Life is long, if we're lucky." She nodded, thoughtful rather than dismissive. "Maybe. After tomorrow's event at the Harringtons, things should calm down a bit. James will know one way or the other about the partnership, and we can all exhale." "Are you worried about it?" I asked. "The partnership decision?" Rebecca leaned against the doorframe, considering the question. "Yes and no. The money would be welcome. Private school tuition for 3 children adds up quickly. But it would also mean more pressure, more expectations, more of James's attention, directed toward the firm rather than home." It was the most candid assessment of her marriage I'd heard from her, an acknowledgement of the trade-offs inherent in the life they'd built together. "What would you want, if the choice were entirely yours?" I asked. She shrugged, a small, uncertain gesture that reminded me of her teenage self. "I don't know anymore. We've been on this track for so long. Bigger house, better schools, more prestigious connections, that I'm not sure I remember what our original destination was supposed to be." The metaphor struck me as both apt and sad. A journey continued out of momentum rather than conviction. "Maybe this is a good time to revisit that question," I suggested. "With your financial future more secure, you have options you didn't have before." Rebecca looked at me sharply. "What do you mean, more secure?" I realized I'd inadvertently revealed more than I'd intended about my financial plans. "Just that. With my lottery win, I'll be able to help with the grandchildren's education and other needs. That takes some pressure off, doesn't it?" She studied me for a long moment. "You're planning something, some kind of trust or financial arrangement." It wasn't a question, and I didn't try to deny it. "Yes, nothing complicated. Just making sure those I love are taken care of." "You don't have to do that, Mom," she said softly. "After how we treated you, we don't deserve—" "It's not about deserving," I interrupted gently. "It's about loving. That's what family does. We take care of each other. Sometimes imperfectly, sometimes with missteps, but we keep trying. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. She stepped forward and embraced me. Not the cautious hug of our initial reconciliation, but a full, wholehearted embrace between mother and daughter. "I'm so sorry for everything," she whispered against my shoulder. "For the garage, for the years of distance, for making you feel less than treasured." "I know," I murmured, stroking her hair as I had when she was small. "It's behind us now. We're writing a new chapter." When she finally stepped back, wiping her eyes, she looked lighter somehow, as if a burden she'd carried for years had finally been set down. "Get some rest," I told her. "Tomorrow's a big day." "For James, maybe," she said with a small smile. "For us, it's just another step in figuring out what really matters." As she turned to go, I was struck by the truth of her words. The Harrington event, so central to James's ambitions, was indeed just one more day in our unfolding reconciliation, important but not defining. The real work was happening in quiet conversations, in small gestures of trust, in the gradual dismantling of walls built over decades of misunderstanding and hurt. That night, I dreamed of fairy houses and detective stories, of Teresa's enchiladas and maritime museums, the humble treasures of my life intertwined with the newfound blessings of reconnection. In the dream, Rebecca and the children visited my Millfield home, filling its modest rooms with laughter and belonging. It was just a dream, but it felt like a glimpse of possibility, a future where our different worlds could coexist without one diminishing the other. A hope worth holding on to as we navigated the complexities of wealth and family, reconciliation, and renewal. The morning of the Harrington gathering dawned bright and clear. I woke early, still adjusting to the luxury of the guest room after my brief return to Millfield. Through the window, I could see dew glistening on the perfectly manicured lawn, catching the first rays of sunlight like scattered diamonds. Downstairs, I found James already dressed in a crisp suit, pacing the kitchen with a coffee mug clutched in his hand. His expression was tense, his movements sharp with nervous energy. "Eleanor?" he greeted me, glancing at his watch. "You're up early." "Old habits," I replied, moving to pour myself coffee from the elaborate machine that had taken me 3 days to learn to operate. "Are you all right, James? You seem anxious." He ran a hand through his carefully styled hair. "Today could change everything." Miles hinted strongly that partnership decisions would be finalized this weekend. "This gathering isn't just social, it's the final assessment." I nodded, understanding his nervousness even if I didn't fully share his single-minded focus on advancement. "You've worked hard for this opportunity. Try to enjoy the day as well." James gave a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Enjoy. Right." He checked his watch again. "I need to review some figures before we leave. The Andersons will be there, major potential clients. If I can secure their business while impressing Miles." He hurried off, leaving his coffee, half finished, on the counter. I shook my head slightly, wondering again at the relentless pressure of the life he and Rebecca had chosen. Every interaction calculated, every relationship evaluated for its potential advantage. Rebecca joined me. A few minutes later, still in her robe, her hair tousled from sleep. Without makeup or her usual polished appearance, she looked younger, more like the daughter I remembered. "Morning," she yawned, reaching for the coffee. "James already in full strategic mode?" "Complete with battle plans and contingency strategies," I confirmed with a smile. She sighed, leaning against the counter. "He was up half the night rehearsing conversation topics. Sometimes I wonder if he remembers how to just talk to people without an agenda." The candid observation surprised me, another small sign of Rebecca's willingness to share her true thoughts rather than presenting a perfect facade. "Are you looking forward to the gathering?" I asked. She shrugged, a gesture both casual and revealing. "Honestly, not particularly. These events are exhausting. All that careful conversation, the constant awareness of social hierarchies, the unspoken competitions. She took a sip of coffee. But it means a lot to James, and it might be interesting to see you charm Miles Harrington again. I didn't charm him, I protested. We just had a conversation about something we both enjoy. Exactly, Rebecca said, with a knowing smile. Authentic interest and conversation rather than calculated networking. It's refreshing. To them, people like the Harringtons who are constantly surrounded by climbers and sycophants. Her insight caught me off guard. You sound like you understand their world very well. I've been studying it for years, she replied, like an anthropologist observing a foreign culture, learning the customs, the taboos, the rituals. She gave a small, self-deprecating laugh. I've become quite fluent in their language, even if I sometimes feel like I'm playing a part rather than being myself. The admission, so honest, so vulnerable, created a moment of true connection between us. For perhaps the first time, Rebecca was allowing me to see behind the carefully constructed persona she'd maintained for so long. And who is yourself? I asked gently. The real Rebecca beneath the performance? She gazed into her coffee cup, as if the answer might be found in its depths. I'm not entirely sure anymore, she admitted. Sometimes I catch glimpses when I'm reading with the children, or early mornings in the garden before everyone wakes up. Those quiet moments when I'm not trying to be anything for anyone. She looked up at me. I think that's why these past few days with you have been so disorienting. You keep seeing past the performance to the person underneath. The person I've almost forgotten how to be. My throat tightened with emotion. That person is still there, Rebecca. She always has been. Maybe, she agreed softly. I'm starting to believe that might be true. Our conversation was interrupted by the arrival of the children, pajama-clad and sleep-rumpled, clamoring for breakfast and attention. The moment of quiet intimacy passed, but something had shifted between us, another small step toward genuine reconnection. The day unfolded in a flurry of preparation for the evening's event. James disappeared into his home office, emerging only for brief strategy sessions with Rebecca about which guests to prioritize, which topics to emphasize or avoid. The children were kept occupied with a movie marathon supervised by their regular babysitter, while Rebecca and I readied ourselves with less intensity, but equal care. I chose my outfit thoughtfully, an elegant pantsuit in deep burgundy that Martin's wife had helped me select during my brief return to Millfield. Not trying to compete with the designer labels that would fill the Harringtons' home, but dignified and appropriate. Rebecca, stunning in a midnight blue cocktail dress, approved with a genuine smile. You look beautiful, Mom, she said as we waited in the foyer for James to join us. That color is perfect on you. Thank you, I replied, touched by the compliment. You look lovely too. James appeared, adjusting his tie with precise movements. His expression was focused, almost stern, as he gave us both an appraising look. Ready? He asked, his tone making it clear this was more mission than social occasion. The drive to the Harringtons' estate was tense with James's nervous energy. He reviewed key talking points like a student before an exam, while Rebecca nodded, in the passenger seat, occasionally glancing back at me with a small, conspiratorial smile that seemed to say, "See what I mean?" The Harrington home was exactly as I'd imagined, a sprawling stone mansion set on manicured grounds, with uniformed staff greeting arrivals and taking cars. As we walked toward the entrance, James straightened his shoulders like a soldier preparing for battle. Remember, he murmured to Rebecca, the Andersons are key targets tonight. If you can get Elaine Anderson talking about her charity work. I know, James, Rebecca replied with practiced patience. We've been over this. Inside, the house was a testament to old money and refined taste, antiques that had clearly been collected over generations rather than purchased en masse. art that reflected genuine appreciation rather than investment strategy. It was wealth of a different sort than the more ostentatious displays I'd seen in some of Rebecca and James's neighbors' homes. Miles Harrington spotted us immediately, breaking away from a conversation to greet us with surprising warmth. "The Williamsons!" he exclaimed, shaking James's hand firmly. "And Eleanor. Delighted you could join us." His focus on me seemed to both please and slightly discomfit James. "Arthur Chen has been asking if you'd arrived yet. He's eager to continue your conversation about maritime history." James's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. This wasn't following his carefully plotted script, the attention being directed toward me rather than his professional accomplishments. "I'd be happy to speak with Arthur again," I said, not wanting to derail James's opportunity, but also unwilling to diminish myself to satisfy his agenda. But I'm sure he'd also be interested in James's insights on the Anderson portfolio strategy. James was telling me about it on the drive over. Quite impressive. Miles's eyebrows rose slightly. "Indeed? Well, we should certainly discuss that as well. Come, let me introduce you around." He guided us deeper into the gathering, his hand lightly at my elbow in a gesture of respect that clearly registered with every observing guest. The next 2 hours were a carefully choreographed social dance. I found myself separated from Rebecca and James, drawn into conversations with various guests who seemed genuinely interested in my perspectives rather than my connections. It was flattering, but also somewhat disconcerting. This sudden social capital based on nothing more than Miles Harrington's apparent approval. From across the room, I occasionally caught glimpses of James working his strategy, engaged in intense conversation with the Andersons, laughing at appropriate moments with various partners, his expression carefully calibrated to project competence. Rebecca moved through the crowd with practiced grace, supporting James's efforts while maintaining her own network of connections. They were good at this, I realized. This complex game of social positioning and strategic relationship building. Years of practice had honed their skills to a fine art. Yet watching them, I couldn't help wondering if the performance brought them joy or merely advancement. During a quiet moment by the refreshment table, Arthur Chen joined me, his expression brightening with genuine pleasure. "Eleanor, I was hoping we'd have a chance to continue our conversation about the Whitaker collection. I've been doing some reading since we last spoke. Fascinating history about those ship models." We fell into easy conversation about maritime traditions and the craftsmanship of miniature shipbuilding. It was refreshing to discuss something simply for the pleasure of shared interest, without calculating its potential benefit or strategic value. Our conversation was interrupted by Celeste Harrington, who approached with a woman I hadn't met yet, elegantly dressed, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Eleanor, I wanted to introduce you to Judith Pearson," Celeste said with practiced smoothness. "Judith is on the board of the Regional Maritime Museum Association. When I mentioned your connection to the Whitaker collection, she was most interested." Judith extended her hand. "Celeste tells me you're a volunteer docent at a small coastal museum. We're always looking to build relationships with local collections for our regional exhibits." The next 20 minutes were an unexpected deep dive into museum curation, preservation techniques, and the challenges of small institutions with limited budgets. Judith listened intently to my descriptions of the Whitaker collection's unique features, occasionally making notes on her phone. "I'd very much like to visit your museum," she said finally. "Perhaps we could discuss a temporary exhibit exchange? Some of your ship models displayed at our main facility in exchange for pieces from our navigation instrument collection." "That would be wonderful," I replied sincerely. "The exposure would mean so much to our local museum." "Excellent. I'll be in touch." She handed me her card. Heavy cardstock with embossed lettering that spoke of institutional prestige. As she moved away, I caught sight of James watching our interaction, his expression a complex mixture of surprise and calculation. He had been tracking me throughout the evening, I realized, adjusting his own strategy based on my unexpected social currency. The evening progressed with more introductions, more conversations that seemed to position me as someone of interest, rather than merely James's mother-in-law. It was a strange reversal of status that I hadn't anticipated and wasn't entirely comfortable with, this value assigned to me based not on who I was, but on who seemed to approve of me. Around 9, Miles Harrington gathered everyone's attention with the gentle tapping of a spoon against his crystal glass. The room quieted immediately, all eyes turning toward our host. "Friends," he began, his voice carrying easily through the space. "Thank you for joining us this evening. Celeste and I are delighted to have you in our home." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room before settling on James. "As many of you know, we've been considering some structural changes at Harrington, Chen & Associates. After careful deliberation, I'm pleased to announce that effective Monday, James Williamson will be joining our partnership ranks." A round of applause filled the room. James's face transformed with barely contained elation, while Rebecca beamed beside him, accepting congratulations from nearby guests. Miles continued with some remarks about James's contributions to the firm, his potential for future leadership, the clients he had brought in. I watched from a slight distance, genuinely happy for James's achievement, yet somewhat troubled by the naked ambition that had driven him to it. An ambition that had, just days ago, deemed me unworthy of basic hospitality. After the announcement, James was surrounded by well-wishers and colleagues offering congratulations. Rebecca made her way to my side, her expression a mixture of pride and something more complex. "He did it," she said softly. "Everything he's been working toward for years." "I'm happy for him," I replied sincerely. "For both of you. It's a significant achievement." Rebecca nodded, watching her husband accept accolades with practiced humility. "Yes, it is." She hesitated, then added, "But I keep thinking about our conversation this morning, about performances and authentic selves. Will this achievement bring him joy, or just the pressure to reach for the next rung on the ladder?" It was a profound question, one that revealed Rebecca's growing willingness to examine the values that had shaped their lives together. "Only he can answer that," I said gently. "But it's a question worth asking, of ourselves as much as of others." She nodded thoughtfully, then was pulled away by another guest offering congratulations. I found myself alone for a moment, observing the social dynamics around me with the clarity of someone not fully invested in their outcomes. James had achieved his goal. My presence at this gathering had perhaps contributed in some small way to his success, though his own merits had clearly been the deciding factor. My unexpected social capital with the Harringtons had served its purpose in his carefully plotted advancement. What role would I play in their lives now that this milestone had been reached? As the evening drew to a close, guests began to depart, with final congratulations and promises of future engagements. Miles Harrington sought me out as we prepared to leave. "Eleanor, it's been a pleasure having you join us," he said with apparent sincerity. "Judith Pearson was quite impressed with your knowledge of maritime collections. I believe she's serious about that exhibit exchange she mentioned." "It would be wonderful for our little museum," I replied. "Thank you for the introduction." Miles nodded, then added with a slight lowering of his voice, "James is a talented attorney with a bright future at the firm. Rebecca has always been an asset to his career advancement." He paused, his gaze direct. "But I suspect there's more depth to your family than the polished surface they present to the world. It's refreshing to encounter that authenticity in our circles." His observation was surprisingly perceptive and somewhat unsettling in its accuracy. Before I could formulate a response, he was called away by another departing guest, leaving me to ponder his words. The drive home was animated by James's elation. The tension that had marked our journey to the Harrington estate had transformed into expansive enthusiasm as he recounted conversations, analyzed reactions, and planned next steps in his newly elevated position. "Did you see Anderson's face when Miles made the announcement?" he asked, glancing at Rebecca. "I think we've got their business secured." And the way Chen immediately started talking about bringing me into the Westlake negotiations, that's a 7-figure client right there. Rebecca made appropriate responses, but I noticed her watching him with that same thoughtful expression from earlier. Pride mixed with a new awareness of the patterns that defined their lives. When we arrived home, the babysitter reported that the children had been perfectly behaved and were all sound asleep. James immediately retreated to his office to make some notes while everything's fresh, leaving Rebecca and me alone in the kitchen. "Would you like some tea?" she offered, filling the electric kettle. "I'm too wired to sleep just yet." "That would be nice," I agreed, settling at the island counter. As she prepared the tea, Rebecca seemed contemplative, moving through the familiar motions with a kind of deliberate mindfulness I hadn't observed in her before. "So," she said finally, placing a steaming mug before me. "James got what he wanted. Partner at 38, ahead of his 5-year plan. He should be proud," I said. "It's a significant achievement." "It is," she agreed, sitting across from me with her own mug. And yet, I prompted gently. She sighed, cupping her hands around the warm ceramic. "And yet I find myself wondering if it will be enough. If anything ever will be." She looked up at me, her expression vulnerable. "Does that make me ungrateful? We have everything most people dream of. This house, financial security, healthy children, social status. Why does it sometimes feel like we're still chasing something just beyond our reach?" The question hung between us, profound in its simplicity, challenging in its implications. I chose my words carefully, not wanting to dismiss her legitimate accomplishments while still acknowledging the emptiness she was describing. "Having goals isn't the problem," I said slowly. "It's when the achievement becomes the only measure of worth, when who we are gets lost in what we have, or what position we hold." Rebecca nodded, her gaze distant. When I was watching James tonight, surrounded by all those people congratulating him, I had this strange moment of clarity. I could see the next 20 years mapped out perfectly. More promotions, bigger house, prestigious board positions, carefully curated vacation photos for the Christmas card. She paused, turning her mug slowly, and I realized I wasn't excited by that vision. I wasn't dreading it either. I just felt nothing. "What would excite you?" I asked. "If you could design your life around joy rather than achievement, what would that look like?" She seemed startled by the question, as if no one had ever asked her to consider her desires separate from the established trajectory of her life. "I don't know," she admitted. "That's the sad part. I've been so focused on fitting into this world, on helping James advance, on raising the children according to certain expectations, I've lost track of what I actually want." "Perhaps that's the next journey then," I suggested. "Not climbing another rung on the ladder, but discovering what would bring genuine fulfillment." Rebecca smiled faintly. "That sounds both terrifying and liberating. The most important journeys often are." We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, sipping our tea. Outside, the quiet of the affluent neighborhood was broken only by the distant sound of sprinklers activating on carefully timed schedules. "Mom," Rebecca said finally, "thank you for coming back into our lives. Not just because of the lottery win or the Harrington connection, but because I think I needed you. To remember who I was before all this. To see possibilities beyond the path we've been on." Her words touched something deep within me, a maternal longing to guide, to support, to help my child find her way through confusion toward clarity. "I'll always be here for you," I promised, whatever path you choose. In that quiet kitchen, with James celebrating his achievement in his office and the children dreaming upstairs, something shifted between us. A final falling away of the walls that had separated us for so long. Not because of money or social connections, but because of honesty, vulnerability, and the courage to question the values that had driven us apart. I didn't know what the coming weeks would bring, how James would adjust to his new position, how Rebecca might begin to rediscover her authentic desires, how my own life would evolve with these renewed connections. But I knew we were finally seeing each other clearly, with all our flaws and fears and hopes laid bare. From a garage cot to heart-to-heart conversations over tea, it had been an extraordinary journey of reconnection. Not the fairy tale reunion I might have imagined when I first learned of my lottery win, but something more complex and ultimately more valuable. A second chance at genuine relationship, built on truth rather than performance, on love rather than advantage. As I headed upstairs to the guest room that now felt like a belonging place, I thought about the certified check that had started this journey, the millions that had opened a door but hadn't created the healing that was now unfolding organically between us. The money had provided an opportunity, but the real treasure was what we were building in its wake: understanding, forgiveness, and the promise of a future together as a family rediscovered. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.